Psychological trauma is the aftermath that occurs when someone suffers through an event outside of their control that causes them deep mental or physical anguish. The effects of trauma can last as long as a lifetime, and traumatic experiences can happen at any time throughout a person's life, but trauma usually occurs first during childhood and adolescence. A Silent Voice is a story about the relationship between an elementary school bully and his victim when he seeks to reconcile with her years later. The story follows Shouya Yoshida as he goes from being a rowdy school bully with something to prove to a withdrawn and psychologically damaged young adult. Although bullying is at the core of the narrative of A Silent Voice, the movie is much more about the lasting effects of trauma that can be caused by even small events in a person's life, and how it can change the trajectory of that life. No character in the film is a better example of the cluster of various psychological effects and symptoms that trauma can cause than Shouya Yoshida. In order to understand Shouya's symptoms, one must first review his initial trauma. The story starts with Shouya being a bully. He was verbally and physically abusive to a deaf girl in his classroom. Shouya causes irreparable damage to his victim's ear, Shoko Nishimiya, when he snatched her hearing aids from her ear, causing one of her ears to bleed. After only being in school together for less than a full year, Shoko moved away. The events following these cases of bullying were as follows. Shouya loses his friends who blame and bully him for all of the events that occurred with Shoko, even though they participated. He goes to middle school and finds his former friend Kazuki and the others who still reject him and then ostracize him, telling everyone else in their classes that Shouya is a bully and how he made a deaf girl leave school. The narrative doesn't give us much more about what happened in middle school following his ostracization by his peers. We can, however, infer that he at some point internalized his feelings of regret and guilt from the abuse that he caused Shoko based upon his behaviors in high school and his desire, when the narrative begins again, to reconcile with her and become friends. So prior to the events of the main narrative, we can assume that Shouya was bullied by his former best friend for his abuses, ostracized and socially neglected, and was encumbered by the guilt of his past. These are the traumas that took place over the approximately 6 years' time after Shoko moved away that caused such a pronounced change in Shouya's demeanor and sense of self, degenerating into the following cluster of psychological and psychosomatic symptoms. Avoidant Personality. One of the first interactions that we see with Shouya and his high school peers is him walking the halls of his school, focusing on everyone's feet and giving no one in the school any eye contact. Even while interacting directly with peers, Shouya refuses to look anyone in the eye. This is a form of self-isolation. Not only does Shouya refuse to make any intentional friendships, he unconsciously impairs any possibility of making a friend or having an authentic interaction with another person by avoiding their eyes, stammering, and speaking very little. This symptom is an effect of internalized feelings of rejection caused by the years he spent ostracized from his peers. It is also a defense mechanism designed to protect him from more feelings of rejection by rejecting others first. Projection. Shouya spends a lot of time projecting his feelings of worthlessness onto others. He spends a lot of time also analyzing his peers to gauge whether or not they have positive or negative feelings towards him, often assuming that they're saying something negative about who he is or what he's done. He confronts Miki with the assumption that she's spreading rumors about what he's done in the past, suggesting that this might make her a hypocrite.
Wait, you think I'm spreading rumors about what happened in elementary school?
Will you keep it down? The whole school can hear you.
The feelings that he projects onto others are primarily how he feels about himself. If he feels Miki is a hypocrite for talking about Shoko being bullied, even though she saw it and ignored it, Shouya may feel like a hypocrite himself for even asking Shoko to be his friend in the first place, after all the pain that he caused her. Social ineptitude. Shouya portrays various signs of being socially inept. Due to experiences with bullying and years of social isolation, Shouya has trouble following or understanding a concept for basic social interactions. Due to a fear of rejection and ridicule, Shouya only engages in social interactions where it is assured that he is liked by the opposite person. And even when he engages with peers in social settings, he is unsure of himself and asks unusual questions or awkward questions about relationship or the person's comfortability.
Hey, do you mind if I ask you something? What does it mean to become someone's friend? Like, is there some sort of friendship process you go through? Or like, do you need any specific qualifications?
Shouya is also very self-critical. He often behaves indirectly with his friends or peers. Instead of making definitive choices in a relationship, he makes passive ones, prefacing questions with another question or saying that he wants to do something before doing it. Essentially, he's asking for permission. Other symptoms of Shouya's social ineptitude include blushing and sweating when he is nervous in various social settings. Self-Sabotage. As a victim of trauma himself, Shouya has a very low threshold for frustration. Even the slightest amount of social pressure or dis-ease can feel monumental to him. This will cause him to lash out against his new relationships when he thinks they're causing him pain to return to a place of normalcy. There are many ways to sabotage relationships, but Shouya does this most often in anger and in isolation. A silent voice shows how Shouya pulls away from relationships abruptly when he feels that they may be causing him harm, when the blue X returns to people's faces. But Shouya also insults his new group of friends to make them go away from him when they start to argue, so that he can return to his place of safety, sabotaging a chance at true understanding and friendship. Psychosomatic nausea. In addition to the psychological or behavioral symptoms of trauma, these experiences can manifest themselves in physical symptoms as a reaction to anxiety or distress. Persons with high levels of anxiousness or anxiety disorders like Shouya may experience physical symptoms like nausea or vomiting. Often triggered by feelings of embarrassment or personal attack, Shouya is overcome with nausea. He responds to this nausea by immediately fleeing the scene of his distress. Suicide. Shouya's suicide plans were his first action in the narrative, and the first indication that the audience gets that there is serious trauma in his life. Suicide remains the second leading cause of death for persons between the ages of 15 and 29 globally. There are a number of warning signs associated with suicide that are part and parcel of the manifestations of Shouya's trauma. Being withdrawn, inability to tolerate frustration, showing extended apathy, creating plans to commit suicide, but additionally depression. Overcome with the despair of living a life with so much pain, Shouya creates a plan to take his own life, but chooses not to. A silent voice makes a point at beginning the first and third acts of the film with suicide. Shouya's planned and rejected, and Shoko's attempted. The parallels between Shouya's and Shoko's suicides remind the viewer that for what it's worth, everyone goes through pain. Everyone is flawed and everyone has trauma. The majority of the narrative is spent focusing on Shouya's problems, growth, and success at reconciliation, but through Shoko's suicide attempt, which comes at a shock to the audience, we see that the same hopelessness that brought Shouya to plan his suicide is in all of us, shrouded and silent. The difference being is that Shouya's suicide was thwarted by his thoughts of Shoko, the pain that she was feeling, the pain that Shouya caused her, and his need to reconcile that pain. Shoko, on the other hand, hadn't yet reconciled her pain and the pain that she felt she was causing others. A silent voice shows through very small vignettes in the lives of its cast of characters that we all have damage that manifests itself in various ways: loneliness, anger, conceit. Not all of these damages will lead a person to death, but a silent voice tells the audience that only through being unselfish do we grow away from our hurt. By thinking outside of ourselves and acknowledging the pain of others, can we truly pull ourselves away from our own? Loving others enough to understand and accept their hurt and our own as wholly connected, we will begin the work of interpersonal healing.
Please, God, if you give me one more ounce of strength, I won't run away from my problems anymore. Just do this one thing for me, please. Starting tomorrow, I'll look everyone in the eye. Starting tomorrow, I'll listen when people speak to me. Starting tomorrow, I'll be better.
A silent voice maintains that we heal ourselves best when we see, hear, and care for one another.